The Baron wanted no wife until the widow he hired to feed his girl said, "I pray for her like my own." Wyoming Territory, December 1882. The heavens sagged heavy and slate-colored above the Wind River Mountains, throwing a dull metallic sheen across the basin beneath. Fresh powder had blanketed the ground during the dark hours and promised to continue without pause for the coming days. It draped the barriers, muted the edges of the rooftops, and swallowed the trail in the wake of Mara Lindley as the cart that had delivered her vanished into the pale hush. The Ron Ranch matched the whispers that circulated, vast, starkly simple, and as frigid as an abandoned tomb. Wisps of gray ascended from a solitary flue. The primary dwelling hunkered down on the terrain as if it claimed allegiance to none and desired none to claim it in return. Mara descended, her footwear grinding against the frozen crust. Her digits, flushed raw by the chill, clutched the strap of a modest hide valise, the sole baggage she bore. She wore a plain gray wool coat and a scarf her mother once knit-tucked under her chin. "You sure this is the place?" the wagon driver asked. "I'm sure." He gave her one last look, part pity, part respect, then flicked the resand was gone. Moments passed before the side door creaked open. A man in his 60s stepped out and pulled on a pair of gloves. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair gone silver and wild. "Miss Lindley," he asked, voice dry as old timber. "Yes, sir. I'm Thomas. Been working for the Rands longer than I care to count." "Come on, then." They walked in silence past the corral where wind had swept snow into sharp ridges. No sound but boots on frozen earth and the wind scraping over the barn roof. "Before we go in," Thomas said, pausing at the barn door, "best you know, don't expect kindness. Calderon isn't one for talking or thanking." "I did not come here for kindness," Mara replied. "Only work." Thomas gave her a look. Not quite approval, not quite doubt. Then pushed open the barn door. The air inside was warmer, filled with a scent of hay, animals, and old leather. A single lantern hung from a beam, casting gold light across the straw. At the far end, a man brushed down a dark-coated mare. He did not look up. Thomas cleared his throat. "Calder. This here's Miss Lindley." The brushing stopped. A long silence followed. Mara stepped forward. "Slow but sure. I came as agreed," she said, "to cook for the child." The man turned. Older Ron was younger than she expected, but not young. 34 perhaps, but weathered by something colder than age. His features were sharp, jaw tight beneath a week's growth of beard. His right cheek held the faint trace of an old wound, faded, but there. He looked at her like she was a report of bad weather. "I remember the letter," he said. Finally she nodded. "I do not expect more than what was agreed. You'll cook, clean what needs cleaning. You'll stay in the guest quarters, not the house. That suits me fine. There is a girl, 5, Junior. She does not speak to strangers. I'm not here to speak." Another pause. Calder studied her. Mara met his gaze, not with defiance, but steadiness. The kind of quiet a man could lean on if he let himself. "I did not ask for a replacement wife," he said at last. "I did not come to be one." Held her eyes a moment longer, then turned back to the horse without another word. Thomas nodded toward the side path. "Guest house is that way. Wood stove's temperamental. I'll bring sundry kindling." Mia gave a polite nod, then walked away. Behind her, Calder watched from the corner of his eye, not quite looking, but listening to her boots on the barn floor to the way she walked. Not hesitant, not afraid. Outside, the snow kept falling. If this story has already stirred something in you, wait until the silence breaks. Hit the hype button to follow the storm to its end. The wind picked up after sunset. It howled across the valley, slipping through the cracks in the walls and rattling the shutters like a restless spirit. The temperature had dropped sharply, enough to freeze the water bucket on the porch and turn breath into smoke with every step. Mara stirred the stew slowly, watching it bubble just enough not to boil over. The kitchen was warm, the only room in the house that felt lived in. She worked quietly, her eyes often flicking to the narrow stairwell where the child had disappeared earlier with nothing but a blank look. Junior Ron had not spoken a single word all day. The girl had eaten the stew without fuss, but without joy. She held the spoon like it was someone else's hand and never once looked up from her bowl. Then she had gone upstairs alone, small boots thumping on wood, and closed the door behind her. Now it was nearly midnight. Mara washed the pot and set it to dry, then warmed a bit of water on the stove for tea. She took her cup to the window and watched the snow fall against the dark. It was a quiet that pressed on your ribs from the inside. And then she heard it, a muffled sound, high, soft, broken. It came again, a child crying. Mara set the cup down. She walked up the stairs, slow, cautious, each step creaking beneath her weight. At the top, she hesitated. The hallway was narrow, the light from the oil lamp barely reaching past the first door. She knocked gently. No answer. She opened the door. The room was dark, save for the glow of moonlight filtering through the frost-bitten window. Junia sat curled at the foot of the bed, her back to the door, her small shoulders trembling with each quiet sob. Mara stepped inside. "I will not stay," she said softly. "If you want me gone, but I will sit if you let me." Junia did not turn. Mara walked to the far corner of the room, lowered herself onto the floor, and leaned against the wall. For a moment, she said nothing. Then quietly she began to hum. A slow tune, low and old and half forgotten. Words followed, barely more than breath. "Hush now, my darling, the prairie wind sleeps. At the stars are still watching, the sky gently weeps. Your papa's gone riding, your mama holds tight. Sleep, little heartbeat, you're safe in the night." The child did not respond, but her sobs softened. Mara kept singing. Her voice was rough around the edges, like river stone worn down over time. But there was warmth in it, and something more, something wounded. She closed her eyes. The words carried her backward. A tent, a night darker than this. Her son fevered in her arms, his body burning, eyes fluttering. She had sung then too. The fever never broke. Her voice wavered. She inhaled, gathered herself, and kept going. Dream of the springtime where sunflowers grow, where mama once held you and time moved so slow. Themane article, the behind her, in the shadows of the hallway. Calder ran, stood perfectly still. His hand rested on the frame of the doorway, unseen, his jaw clenched. Not from anger, from memory. The same song had once echoed through this house years ago when another woman had tried to soothe another child. The night after Junior was born, when his wife's face had gone pale, when blood had soaked the sheets and nothing had made sense, he remembered the grave, the silence, the looks from neighbors that were both pity and judgment. He remembered burying her with a shovel in frozen ground while Junia cried in Thomas's arms. He remembered thinking, no one will ever enter this house again. And now this woman, this Mara Lay, had entered it not with force, but with music. He stepped back. The floorboard beneath his boot creaked. Upstairs, Mara stopped singing. The room was silent. Junior had curled into her blanket, quiet now, eyes closed. Mara rose without a sound, closed the door gently behind her, and turned. Calder was gone. Only the hush of the wind remained. The morning after the song, Junia came down to the kitchen without being called. She did not say a word. She rarely did, but she stood near the table watching as Mara kneaded dough with slow, steady hands. Mara glanced up, offered the girl a gentle smile, and stepped aside. "I could use help," she said, her tone light, not coaxing. Junia hesitated only a moment before climbing onto the stool. Her hands were small, fingers red from cold, but she pressed them into the dough without fear. They worked in silence, a comfortable silence. Mara guided her gently, shaping the rounds, showing her how to pinch the edges just right. Flour dusted the girl's cheeks like snow. At one point, Mara laughed, soft, surprised, and Junia smiled. It was fleeting, barely there, but it was real. Mara's heart twisted, not from sadness, but from something softer. She reached for a cloth to wipe Junior's hands, but stopped herself. Let the child decide. Upstairs, Calderon stood behind a half-drawn curtain in the hallway, just out of sight. He had come looking for ledger papers. What he found instead was his daughter, smiling for the first time in months. His hand rested on the windowsill, fingers curling around the wood. The grain bit into his palm, but he did not move. He stared at the child he had fed and clothed and kept alive, but had not seen. Not like this. Not since her mother. His throat tightened. He swallowed it down. Later at supper, the bread was warm, fresh, and golden. Junia sat close to Mara. When the woman passed her a bowl, their hands brushed, and the girl did not pull away. Calder set his fork down. She does not need that. Mara looked up from her plate. Need what, Mr. Rand? He did not answer. His gaze rested on Junia, who was chewing slowly, eyes down. You will cook, you will clean, but don't confuse routine with row, he said. She doesn't need a mother. Mara held his stare. There was no challenge in her eyes, only quiet steadiness. Understood? She said nothing else. No defense, no retort, and that unsettled him more than if she had argued. That night, Calder sat alone in the study, the fire low in the great ledger open, pen unmoving. Downstairs, muffled through the floorboards, he heard a sound he had not heard in a long time. A child's giggle, not loud, not wild, but unmistakable. He closed the ledger, stared into the fire, and slowly, unconsciously opened and closed his hand. Once, twice, as if something inside it had begun to thaw. It happened just after noon when the light through the kitchen window was at its sharpest. Junia was helping Mara dry dishes. Her small hands were careful, but her grip uncertain. She reached too far across the table to grab a cloth, and her elbow caught the edge of a porcelain bowl resting on the shelf behind her. It was an old thing, pale blue with tiny gold flecks, barely noticeable unless the light caught them right. It had belonged to Calder's wife. The bowl shattered on the floor. Junia froze, her breath hitched, her eyes locked on the pieces. Calder walked in just in time to see the shards scatter. He stopped mid-stride. Silence fell like a hammer. Mara reached for Junior gently. It's all right, she whispered, but Calder's voice cut through the air. No, it is not. Junia shrank behind Mara, clutching at her apron. That was her mother's, Calder said, his voice sharp, rising. The one thing she had left. She did not mean to, Mara began. Don't speak for her, he snapped. She is old enough to know better? Junior let out a soft, broken sob. Mara turned, crouched low. Sweetheart, she whispered. It's all right. It was an accident. Calder's boots thudded across the floor. She is not your child. Mara stood slowly, putting herself between them. She is not your memory either. Calder's jaw locked. Junia, eyes wide with fear, turned and bolted for the door. Junia, Mara called. But the girl was gone out into the snow without boots, without coat. Mara grabbed her shawl and ran. The cold bit instantly. Wind pulled at her hair as she scanned the yard. Snow had begun falling again, light but steady. She called out once more, Junior! There, by the edge of the barn behind the trough. A small shape curled in on itself. Mara rushed over, dropped to her knees. Junior was trembling. Her cheeks were wet, her fingers red. Baby, Mira whispered, wrapping her shawl around the girl's body. Come here, let me hold you. The Junia did not speak, but she let herself be gathered. Her body was stiff, then slack against Mara's chest. Inside, Calder stood at the window. He saw them, woman and child, knelt together in the snow, framed by the gray light of the storm. His chest ached. He could not name the feeling. When Mira returned to the house, Junia wrapped in her arms, he was waiting by the door. Give her to Thomas, he said. Mara ignored him. She carried Junior to the hearth, lit the fire herself, wrapped the girl in a blanket, and sat on the floor, rocking her gently. Calder stepped forward. Mara looked up, eyes burning. You are angry, she said quietly. I understand that. But you do not raise your voice at a child who's already scared of silence. Calder stiffened. You do not get to tell me how to parent, she interrupted, her tone firm. You're right. I do not. But I will not stand here and watch you turn her into a ghost just because you buried one. He opened his mouth, but she kept going. You're so good at silence, called her Ran. You forgot what it does to a child. She thinks she has to grow up without sound, without softness, because that's all she sees in you. You do not understand, he said, voice low. I lost a child, Mara replied. My boy Wasix. Fever took him in 2 nights. I buried him myself. And I would give anything for the chance to hold him one more time and tell him it was all right to break something. Calder looked down, jaw clenched. I am not trying to replace anyone, she said softer now. But I pray for that girl as if she were my own. Every day he said nothing. Behind them, Junia stirred in the blanket. She looked toward Calder, but not with fear, with something sadder. Hope. And he realized he had yelled, but she had not cried from fear of punishment. She had cried from fear of losing comfort. and that somehow was worse. The sky turned quick and cruel. Wind whipped through the valley with a shriek, dragging snow across the land in wild, blinding sheets. The barn door slammed twice before Thomas could bar it. Mara stood in the kitchen, holding a kettle, watching the storm tighten like a noose around the house. Then came the sound. Hooves, desperate thudding hooves. A horse alone. She ran to the window. Calder's gilding ember was galloping through the yard. Reins loose, breath steaming, eyes wild. Thomas reached the porch, looked once, and turned back with a curse. He went out for firewood this morning. God help him, no one said it, but they all felt it. No man survived the mountains long in a storm like this. Mara pulled on her shawl, tied it tight under her chin. I will go. You'll lose yourself in the white, Thomas warned. I lost a child once, she said, her voice firm. I am not losing anyone else. She grabbed Junior's scarf from the peg. Soft blue wool handed with crooked lines and a lantern. Then she stepped into the storm. The cold struck like a slap. Wind howled in her ears, snow slicing sideways into her face. She kept low, pushing forward through the drifts, eyes scanning for any shape. Any break in the white, past the old pine, across the shallow creek now frozen over, toward the northern wood line where Calder always cut. Thin tracks, deep, erratic boot prints. She followed them, heart pounding. Behind the stone ridge, in a hollow, partly sheltered from the wind, she found him. Calder ran lay half-buried, one leg pinned beneath a fallen log. His hat was gone. Snow clung to his beard. His lips were pale. His eyes fluttered. Open, then shut. Then open again. Junior, he murmured. Don't go, please. Maya dropped to her knees. Calder, Calder, stay with me. He groaned, blinking. Mara, yes, I am here. It took all her strength to shift the log enough to free his leg. She wrapped the scarf around his neck, tucked it close to his skin, and pulled him against her shoulder, step by step, half dragging. She led him home through the storm. That night he burned with fever. Thomas helped get him to the bed, but it was Mara who stayed. She wiped the sweat from his face, fed him broth when he stirred, whispered words of comfort when his body shook. At one point, he reached up blindly and caught her wrist. His voice was awed. You are not. I saw her. I thought she came for me. Mara said nothing. She only laid her hand gently on his brow. It was the first time Calder Rand felt warmth that did not come from a fire. 3 days later, the snow let up. Calder walked, limping but upright, into the main room. Junior watched him from the stairs. Mara set down her mending. He nodded to Thomas, then turned to Mara. Come supper, just you and me. It was not a request. She followed him into the study. The fire glowed low. A pot of stew simmered nearby. 2 bowls, 2 spoons. They sat without speaking at first. Then Calder said, I fought at Shiloh. Took a bullet the side. Thought I would die there in Tennessee mud. He leaned forward, staring into the flames, but that hurt less than losing her. Mara did not ask who he meant. She only waited. I buried her next to the orchard. You know what's there now? She shook her head. Nothing. I let the trees die. Mara looked at the scar peeking through his shirt collar, then at his hand resting on the table. You still carry her? She said softly. Ito. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a gold ring, simple, worn, small. He set it on the shelf above the fire and looked at her. I used to think I would live out my days in silence, just me and the girl in the snow. And now, she asked. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached beside him and picked up a scarf, newer than most, soft blue, uneven in places, the kind Akild might knit. He held it out. I asked Junia to help. She chose the yarn, I chose the color. Mara took the scarf in her hands. I think it suits you, he said. For a long moment, they just sat. The fire crackled. Shadows danced across the walls. No declarations, no promises, just 2 people breathing the same air. Alive, the thaw had begun, but only barely. Snow still blanketed the valley, thick and sullen, though icicles dripped from the eaves and the creek had begun to whisper under its frozen crust. Mara moved through the kitchen with familiar rhythm now. Her apron dusted in flour, her sleeves rolled to the elbow. Junia sat nearby, sketching lopsided animals in the corner with a piece of charcoal. The house was quieter lately, not in that hollow, grief-heavy way, but in a softer, lived-in hush. The kind of quiet that let people breathe until the knock came. Thomas opened the door. The cold spilled in first, then a tall man in a tailored coat stepped through like he owned the room. "Reed ran," he said, pulling off his gloves. "I assume my cousin still lives." He looked around, taking in the simplicity of the house with poorly veiled judgment. "In the study," Thomas muttered. Reed nodded, then turned his gaze to Mia. He offered a smile that did not reach his eyes. "You must be the cook." "I am." His eyes lingered a second too long. Interesting. He moved past her without another word. Behind the study door, the fire was low but burning. Calder rose from the desk with a stiffness that had nothing to do with his healing leg. "You should have sent a letter," he said. "If I had, you would not have opened the door." Reed poured himself a drink without asking. "I came because word reached me in Cheyenne about a woman living here. About the child growing attached. About the Rand name being dragged through the snow by what did the paper call her? A traveling widow with no family, no land, and no name." Calder said nothing. Reed sipped. "There is still a way to fix this. I've spoken with Mayor Whitlock. His daughter Abigail is prepared to marry a fine match, strong family, loyal blood. You do the right thing for Junior for the family name. And send the girl away," her voice was low. "Boarding school in St. Louis, proper safe. She'll come back refined, ready. You'll have your heir, your wife, your respectability." Still, Calder did not answer. Reed set his glass. "Down stood straighter this woman, this Mara she is. Temporary let her go before it becomes permanent." Mara had not meant to hear she had gone to bring tea. She stopped, outside the study as soon as she heard her name. She stood there listening, each word like frost on glass. When the footsteps came toward the door, she slipped away. That night, Mara packed in silence. Her hands moved slowly but certainly, folding her skirts, tucking away her brushes and soap. She placed the blue scarf last, her fingers hesitating on it only briefly. Calder found her by the hearth. "You're leaving," he said. "Not a question." "I am." He looked at Thesmall's trunk by the door, at the shawl already folded over her arm. "You heard I did." He was quiet. Mara turned to him, face unreadable. "I was foolish, I think, to believe there was room in this house for more than one ghost." "You were not a ghost." "No, but I am not a Ran either. And people like me, we are not meant to stay just to pass through and leave the place cleaner than we found it. You do not have to go." She waited, but he said nothing more. And that silence, that unbearable, familiar silence, cut deeper than anything else ever could. Mara nodded once, then turned and walked toward the door. The wagon waited by the gate, wheels half buried in the early snow. The world was pale and still, wrapped in a hush that came before every storm. The sky above was low and gray, swollen with clouds that threatened to break open at any moment. Thomas stood nearby, hat in hand, shifting from one foot to the other. His breath steamed in the air. He had tried in his quiet way to find the right words, something to convince her, something to make her feel the weight she was leaving behind. But Mara had only smiled, laid a hand on his arm, and thanked him for the warmth, thessalence, the kindness she never asked for, but always noticed. Then she had hugged him, brief but firm, before stepping toward the cart with slow, measured steps. Junior stood frozen on the porch steps, fists clenched so tight her knuckles were white. "I will write," Mara said softly. Junior did not answer. Her lip trembled, but she held her silence like a wall. Mara crouched, brushing wind-blown curls from the girl's flushed cheek. Her voice, when it came, was like wool against frost. "You'll be all right, little one." But Junior didn't believe it. She reached for Mara's coat, clutching it with the desperation only a child knows, the kind of grip that says, "Please don't make me do this alone again." "I have to go," Mara whispered, her own throat tightening, her eyes flicked upward. Behind them, Calder stood in the doorway, arms crossed, boots rooted to the threshold, like he could not step forward and would not ask her to stay. His eyes were unreadable, his silence louder than wind. He said nothing, did nothing. The wagon driver gave a low whistle. Storm's coming fast. Mara gently untangled Junior's fingers from her coat, each one resisting like a heartbeat. She kissed the girl's forehead, felt her warmth, and turned toward the wagon. Her steps were steady, her face unreadable, but her hands trembled as she climbed up into the seat. Junior stood on the porch not moving. Then the reins cracked, the horses began to pull, and Mara did not look back. Not until she heard it. Mama, it wasn't a murmur. It was a raw, aching scream piercing the cold like thunder. It came from the girl who had spoken little more than whispers for months, a voice broken open by loss. Mara's heart stopped. She turned sharply. Junior was running barefoot through the snow, arms outstretched, her sobs tearing through the hush of the land. "Mama, Mama, wait, stop," Mara shouted at the driver. The wagon lurched to a halt. She leapt down, skirts flying behind her, her boots hitting the snow in hard, stumbling steps. She met Junior halfway, catching her before the child collapsed into the drifts. Junior clung to her, sobbing, burying her face in Mara's coat like it was the only place left that felt like home. Then hooves thundering wild called her. He rode across the yard like a man chasing something he'd nearly lost forever. He reined in hard, snow spraying from the horse's hooves, and dismounted in one swift motion. The wind whipped between them. His breath came in harsh clouds, and for a long moment he didn't speak. His eyes locked on hers, no longer distant, no longer stone. "Alive, open, I didn't stop you," he said, voice ragged. "Because I didn't know how to ask you to stay." Mara said nothing. "I don't need a wife," he continued, voice low. "I don't know how to be a father, but I know what it feels like to come home to silence. And I don't want that anymore." Tears rimmed her eyes. "You taught me how to love again," he said, stepping closer. "Not with words, not with promises, just by being here." From his coat, he pulled something soft blue, crookedly stitched. "The scarf." "You left this," he said. "But I think it belongs here now." She reached for it slowly, fingers brushing his, then, without hesitation, Calder knelt. Not to plead, but to offer something quiet and whole. Junior reached out first, taking his hand in hers. Mara followed, and together in the middle of the snow Calder ran, pulled them both in. A family not made by blood or name, but by the courage to stay and the choice to love. The first day of spring came with quiet, no fanfare, no grand thaw, just the slow, almost shyer turn of warmth. The kind you don't notice until your fingers stop trembling, until the wind softens and smells like something growing. Melt water dripped steady from the eaves, carving narrow trails through the snow. Patches of brown grass peeked through, fragile but persistent. In the orchard, a robin landed on the branch of a once-dead apple tree, as if testing the truth of the season. Past that orchard, where trees had once been left to wither with memory, a chapel stood, small, wooden, humble as a prayer, said under breath. Once it had been a place for mourning, now it was something else. Inside, candlelight flickered against pine walls, dancing gently on the worn pews and faded altar cloth. The scent of melted wax mingled with fresh lilac tucked into mason jars. Junior stood at the front in her new dress, ivory cotton with a line of tiny blue flowers stitched by her own hands, imperfect like spring, earned like peace. In her small basket were petals, wild rose, daisy, and bits of dried lavender. She walked slow, serious, her steps careful, her face solemn in the way only children can be when they know something matters. One handful at a time, she scattered the flowers down the aisle. Then Mara entered, her arm wrapped in cedars. She wore no veil, no corset, only a pale blue dress that whispered when she walked. No music played, just the wind through the trees outside, and the soft rustle of fabric, and something unspeakably sacred in the silence between steps. The vows were spoken low, not because they were timid, but because they didn't need to be louder. They weren't for show. They were for healing. When the final words were said, Calder didn't kiss her out of habit or hunger. He simply leaned down, pressed his lips gently to her forehead, and closed his eyes. "I found you." That was what it meant. That evening, as the last light faded behind the ridge, Calder walked alone to the edge of the orchard. In his hand was a ring, simple gold, worn smooth over years of silence. He stopped at the small grave. The stone was old, the name barely visible now beneath moss and winter's wear. He knelt, not in guilt, not in grief, but in gratitude. He laid the ring down at the base of the stone. No words rehearsed, just a whisper. "I did not forget you, but I had to stop following you." And with that, he stood, shoulders a little straighter, breath a little easier. Back inside, the fire crackled. pinewood smoke curled into the beams. Mia sat in the rocking chair. Junior nestled against her side, eyes closed, breath slow. The scarf, soft blue and crooked, lay folded neatly beside them. Calder stood in the doorway, watching, not as a man guarding his house, but as a man who had arrived. He crossed the room, crouched low, brushed Junior's curls with gentle fingers. The girl stirred, murmured something that sounded like home, then sank back into sleep. Mara looked up. He didn't speak. He simply reached for her hand, held it, and stayed there, not wandering, not haunted, not unsure, just hair. In the silence of winter, a man found his voice, a woman found her place, and a child found her home. Some love stories are born in fire, others in snow. If this story touched something in you, don't write off just yet. Subscribe to The Many Amazing Love Stories for more tales of unlikely love, quiet strength, and second chances. In thickest and wild of the American frontier, where bullets missed but hearts didn't. We'll see you down the trail.